All right, welcome everybody. So this is, I think, about our fifth in a series of shelter in place or sip in place video teleconferences that showcase one of our wines and storytelling from the cellars and from the vineyards, and a chance to kind of get together and share a glass of wine and share some stories. So today's wine is the 2017 Zinfandel from Zoe Wines on our estate. This comes from our estate vineyard out here in the back behind the winery. And we have a special guest today. Well, two special guests. Ed is visiting us from out east. Ed's been involved with helping us get Zoe Wines distributed on in a number of states, mostly on the East Coast. And Daniel Barron, who is our wine consultant and has been working with us since the inception of Zoe Wines. And he has quite the background. He most recently was the winemaking director at Silver Oak for many years. But I'll let him introduce himself, and as always, to talk a little bit about the background of his video shot there. We want to hear a little bit about what's going on behind you there, Daniel.
Yes. Well, I once said to the great mandolinist David Grisman, I make wine so that I can buy mandolins. And he said, that's funny. I play mandolins, I can buy wine. We're all aspiring to do something to expand our mind and our interest. And when I grow up, I'd like to be a great musician. So I'm working on it. Mandolin, mandola are my instruments. So that's some of the my wife calls some of my mistresses. 1924 Gibson up on the top. A Giacomel from Turin, Italy. A mandola from Idaho, from Lawrence Smart, and a Brazilian bandolim from Rio. So keeps me busy.
And Daniel, who's the bobblehead?
Oh, well, you've got Jackie Robinson, and then of course, so glad you asked. Crazy Crab, for any Giants fans.
Oh, that's funny.
The unmascot from the 1980s. He only lasted a year. They tried to kill him, the fans. Uh-oh. Sorry.
No worries.
Grape brokers trying to get some grapes sold. It's rough out there.
Yeah, it really is. So let me just start by kind of giving you a little intro to what's going on here at Zoe. So we are still operating as a winery. We still have the vineyard activities and operations going at full speed. We still have the cellar activities going on at full speed, so nothing changes there. The inn and the tasting room, however, have been closed since about the second week of March and continue to remain closed. And we don't have a date yet that we know when we'll be able to reopen. But there's an awful lot of discussions and some proposals at the governor's office, both local and kind of statewide, and a number of parties have presented a number of proposals for how wineries in particular, but also inns and hotels can operate safely under the current circumstances. And so we're hoping at some time in the next phase 2 of what they're calling the next wave, we'll get some guidance, and hopefully we'll be in that second phase or very shortly thereafter. And as you can imagine, it's going to involve things like social distancing and how to keep things clean, how to keep your employees safe, how to keep your guests safe, and how to be able to reopen in a way that is meaningful enough to the businesses and to the guests to make it worth everyone's while to do so. So we're looking forward to better days ahead on that front. But in the meanwhile, we've been doing sessions like these, and one thing that's really taken off is our we call it our SIP kits. We send small sample bottles. They're 50 milliliter bottles of 6 of our different wines. There's Travis, you got to speak, so in case people aren't. Can you say something, Travis, so in case somebody has?
Right here.
So those are the sample bottles that we send out. There's 6 of those. We can customize those to whatever varieties you prefer. And we've had groups up to, wow, we've had 15 to 20 people at a time all over the US. Some folks in Europe are now wanting to do this. We're trying to figure out a cost-effective way to get the samples over there legally and safe. It's a great way to continue to sample wines, share wines with friends. It's a very low cost point. It's $30 all in, includes the wines, the shipping, and of course a teleconference like this, a video teleconference with myself, which will guide you through the wines and answer questions and be able to talk about each one of the wines that we ship to you. So that's a lot of fun. And so if you're interested in that, let me know. And we have that on our website as well at zowines.com. Look under the product category of SIP wine tasting kits, and you can get those online. So in the vineyard, what's going on right now is we've been spending the last week doing a lot of handwork, clearing a lot of weeds and cover crop in the new areas of our vineyard, and some of in the old areas. We've done some cultivating under the vines to kind of break up the weeds and to kind of provide some knock out some of the competition, especially for the new vines, to give them as much attention as possible as we water and fertilize in those areas. We've transitioned to organic and fully certified sustainable. And so what that has meant to us is a lot more handwork. The biggest change going to organic is you don't use herbicides, you don't use a lot of synthetic fertilizers, you use all kind of natural products, organic products, and they're not nearly as effective. So it requires a lot more handwork to go through and clean up. But we hope that all that handwork and special attention to detail will translate into better topsoils, better sustainable kind of farming practices, which will translate into far better fruit quality, which will end up in the glass and create some spectacular wines going forward. So that's our mission as it relates to the vineyard. And we just finished most of our bottlings of our early 2019 releases. Those will be the whites. So we did our rosé and the whites. Our 2019 rosé of Zinfandel has been released, and it's tasting remarkable. So check that out. It's available online. We also have bottled the Sauvignon Blanc, the Chardonnay, and the Viognier. Those need bottle time, and they'll be available probably at the end of the year. But currently we still have available the 2018 Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and Viognier, and we recommend in these hot days that are coming that you can stock up on a lot of these wines. They're tasting particularly great right now, and we recommend stocking up, and especially before the hot weather really sets in, because it gets a little more difficult to ship as the days get warmer. It gets either very costly, or we prefer not to ship at all during weather when it gets too warm. So the window is closing, so get your orders in, and we'll make sure we can get these out to you right away. So thanks for joining us. So today we're going to talk about Zinfandel. So Zinfandel was my first love of wine. I didn't start off like many people with white Zinfandel. I actually started off right with the red wine. I was a beer drinker in high school, in college, and really didn't get into wine until I was in college. And Zinfandel was the first one that I really enjoyed right out of the gate. I thought, wow, what an amazing taste! What a versatile beverage! It goes great with so many foods. I loved it by itself. I loved it with the types of foods that I was eating at the time, which was a lot of kind of barbecue and pizzas and pastas, and I just found it to be a super versatile wine. And it also was a wine that I could pronounce, quite frankly. When I was starting off in wine, some of these French words were a little intimidating to me, and Zinfandel I could say and I could remember. And when I was at the restaurant and had to order something, it was the first thing that popped into my head, so it was easy to order. So it was the first wine I ever made in 2001. I got some fruit from Amador County, and I made Zinfandel in my kitchen in San Francisco in the Marina District. And it was the wine that was on the table when my first date with my wife, as if there's going to be another wife later on. Hope she's not watching right now. And it was the wine that I served at my wedding, and it was the wine that I gave as a gift to all of our wedding guests. It was the grape that was growing and was planted at the vineyard when I first purchased it here in 2012. And it continues to be kind of a showcase wine of what we produce here at Zoe Wine. So it's got a long history with Zinfandel. It's a difficult grape in terms of variability. It grows very varied. It has, it ripens at different paces and different sized berries. It's a tricky one it's easy to grow in terms of it's very vigorous and can be very high yielding, but it's a difficult one to grow for quality. So I thought it'd be fun just to talk a little bit with Daniel and kind of pick his brain a little bit around this variety. And so why don't I ask you, Daniel, what are your thoughts on Zinfandel? Kind of what's your background with Zinfandel, and what are your thoughts about it as a wine?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is so unique about the Zinfandel and that I find so compelling is that it's at 13.8 alcohol. Zinfandel is a delicious variety. It has this wonderful brambly raspberry character. But so many California Zinfandels these days, there's really so many Zinfandels because they're all California, are made very, very ripe. They're almost like port. And although those are very impressive and they're nice cocktail wines, it's hard to kind of figure out how to have them with dinner. It's tough to say with a straight face that they are a moderate alcoholic beverage, because you can drink about 1.5 glasses and you're pretty tipsy. So the trick for me with Zinfandel is, how do you make it in a more judicious, in a lower alcohol style, and still have the ripe fruit character? And I think there are two techniques that we've adapted to the Zoe wines. And the first is barysensory analysis, which is determining the date of picking by actually tasting the fruit. Many people talk about tasting the fruit, but this is a method developed in the south of France, in the Research Institute in Montpellier, from the Institut Coopératif du Vin. Professor Rousseau developed a quantitative method of tasting grape berries and noting the development of the 4 aspects of grape ripening: the ripeness of the pulp, the ripeness of the skins, the ripeness of the seeds, and what would the 4th be? Well, the 3 types. Yeah, never in public speaking start out with the 4 thing. I thought there were 4. Anyway, those, and what with red wine, we're really the ripeness of the skins is the most important aspect, because, as you probably know, the pulp of the European wine grape is clear. It's white. And so all the color, the flavor, the aromatics are in the layer of cells just below the skin and in the skin itself. And the ripeness of the skin is what determines how much of that can get into the wine solution. And ironically, the best way to do that is by chewing on the skins. 15 chews in your back of your mouth, on your molars. You can get breaking down, the cell walls are breaking down, and that's the ideal. And then the other technique, so David hasn't mentioned that his vineyard, in addition to having old vine Zinfandel, also has Petite Syrah. And Petite Syrah is a very dark, very tannic grape that, when fermented alone, doesn't make the most charming wine. But there's a technique called co-fermentation, where you take a variety like Petite Syrah, you put a little bit of it in with the Zinfandel, and you ferment them together. And what happens is a knitting together of the aromatic and structural elements that really highlights the positive aspects of both varieties. And so I don't remember what the exact percentages were, David, in this.
It was,
It was 85% Zin and 15% Petite Syrah.
Right. And if you did that on the blending bench, if you took 85% Zin and 15% Petite Syrah, you'd have a very tannic wine. The Petite Syrah would start to dominate. But in co-fermentation, it's a much gentler integration. And, you know, I think this wine is so compelling. It's so full of fruit, and it's so expressive of varietal Zinfandel character, that brambly raspberry character, but it's also smooth and approachable, and it doesn't come across as hot or overripe. And I think that's a great accomplishment.
great. I think the fourth one you were looking for, there was a flavor component.
Right. Thank you.
So actually, the taste is an important dimension of the grape as well, and that's
Exactly.
analysis. So why don't we go ahead and if you do have, if you have them, drink them, have a little taste, and then would love to hear from the folks on the call here a little bit about maybe your experience with Zinfandel, your relationship with Zinfandel, and what your thoughts are on this wine. Yeah, this wine continues to impress me. I mean, right from the get-go, it was our first major release. So we made a 2016 Zinfandel, but it was only like less than 70 cases, I think, total. And it was one of these, try to get under the radar, bring in the fruit. I had sold all my fruit and brought just a little bit in for myself. So it wasn't necessarily a wine of intention. It wasn't our decision throughout the year to make the wine. It wasn't our decision when to pick. It wasn't our decision exactly how everything was going to work in the vineyard, because the grapes were sold to other parties. But because the yields were a little bit more than we expected, we were able to peel off a little bit, and we made our 2016. So this was our first wine where we really kind of started from the get-go with an intention for what we wanted to create and what we wanted it to be at the end. And I'm really pleased with kind of where we landed this. It's not always possible to have the right ripeness at this level of alcohol. Maybe Dan, you can talk about what other people do when they end up bringing the fruit in, or what is a common technique potentially in the industry for how you can adjust where the alcohol is too high. There's a couple of ways of doing that.
Yeah, there's a couple ways of doing it. The most common is just adding water, or in the industry, it's known as Jesus units, JUs. How many JUs are we adding? Because you're turning water into wine. The other methods are to distill out the alcohol. So there are methods where you fractionate the wine and then take the portion with the alcohol and run it through a distilling column. And that is typically referred to as sweet spotting, because you take a small portion you take it down to 9% alcohol, and then you back what's the magical where you achieve what you're after. But you can always kind of sense in those wines a shadow of the overripeness that was there. So it's much better to start out with less ripe fruit or less sugary fruit. We want the fruit to be ripe. We just don't want it to be as high in sugar, so that we end up with less alcohol.
Yeah, and we, again, some of the things we do in the vineyard to try to steer the outcome to be perfect ripeness, but not overly sugary. Maybe, Dan, do you want to talk about some of our techniques in the vineyard to try to help achieve that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that has to do with the exposure of the fruit, and there's a tendency, I don't know how granular we want to go technically, but there are a number of techniques in terms of pulling leaves off of the shoots so that the clusters have better exposure to light, because that's what gets them to produce darker colored berries. If you anthropomorphize a little, you realize, you think about the grapevine has two courses of action. One is to make its fruit unattractive to birds so the seeds fall right at its feet. And the other is to create a better environment for its progeny. So to create darkly colored fruit that birds will be attracted to. And so as viticulturists, we're generally wanting to induce the second path, but it's better to do that with judicious irrigation and fertilization so that the shoots, the vines don't create these big, thick, vigorous canopies, rather than go in and try to do remedial work where you have a really vigorous canopy and then you're going in and trying to open it up and create light exposure, because that tends to cut both ways, and you end up with too much light, too much sun, heat on the clusters, and you end up getting the sugar maturity, the maturity of the pulp, back to our berry sensory analysis, the maturity of the pulp going faster than the maturity of the skins. And that's where you end up with having high Brix levels, high sugar levels, and high alcohols.
It's a delicate balance, but it's one that, again, you need to be, with intention, you need to be thinking about everything you want to do to steer to the outcome that you're looking for, and not just hope that near the end of the growing season you have a nice ripeness with the right sugar levels. You actually have to steer the plant towards that outcome. And that's why one of the reasons we're so keen on having an estate vineyard is we need to be able to control the whole process from the plant all the way to the glass. So I want to go around a little bit and talk. Maybe we can, Deb, and do you guys have the Zinfandel there, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we do. We really like this one. I think we had a bottle last week too.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, we were wondering, or I was wondering, do you guys use any method to test the Brix level in the grapes before harvest, or do you just really chew it up and taste the skin and figure it out by that?
Yeah, I think we use both kind of the old world, new world techniques. So it's a lot of sensory analysis with the sight and our mouths, but we also then cross-reference that by plotting graphs, by actually using a refractometer to check the Brix. We have some lab equipment that can also look at other numbers, the acidity, kind of the pH of the grapes. And these are the main things that we look at just to check ourselves. It's one thing to taste, but it's another thing to kind of have have those numeric evidence to kind of back up how you're feeling. Sometimes they don't correlate, and we end up having to go with our feelings and tastes, because I think that's to me at least our better indicator. We find if you go just by the numbers, you're always going to overshoot and be wrong. That's at least been my experience. And it's always better to not be too much, head into the computer on a spreadsheet, but really out in the field and walking the rows and kind of tasting as much of the fruit as you can.
I have one more question. You guys have I think it's Winemakers or Vintners Reserve of the Zin as well. Can you talk about the difference between the two?
Sure. So in that year, again, speaking of making wine with intention, we wanted to experiment with smaller fermentation vessels and open top fermenters, and with slightly more new oak and slightly longer barrel aging. So the Winemaker Select picked on the same day, the same ratio of Zinfandel Petite Syrah from a section of the vineyard that I thought would be a little more high in tannins, smaller berries, less vigorous part of the vineyard. And then segregated out, fermented in smaller vessels with open top fermenters. And then we probably had maybe about 10 to 12% more new oak and about a month or two longer barrel aging on this. So the idea was to dial up the tannins on one wine versus the other and see kind of how those would evolve and how much they would differ from each other, and how distinctive those two wines would be. And they ended up being quite different. And so the experiment kind of proved to us that, there are ways of dialing up and down different characters of the wine depending upon how you do the winemaking versus just the pure pick date and the pure ratio of Zinfandel to Petite Syrah. And so that was an interesting experiment. And yet, to me, one that, we don't recreate those experiments every year. When we have a question or if we have an idea, those turn into sometimes a Winemaker Select. So Winemaker Select is not necessarily a reserve. It's really a wine made with intention, with some kind of idea or hypothesis behind it that we want to test and prove out. And so that's kind of where the Winemaker Select kind of logo and brand comes from. Good questions. Both are still available, so.
Thank you.
So 3232 was an accident. Is that what you're saying?
3232 was neither made with intention nor with any real idea other than let's experiment with what the fruit can do, because we didn't pick the pick date, we didn't control the farming practices as winemakers. We did it as a vineyard. And so it was, we just got our permit, and I was able to sneak in a couple grapes to make the wine the first year. So it was an experiment. It was helpful, and it kind of guided us to the next year. So we kept the things that we liked about it, and we added to it. But it was not from the ground up a wine that we started really thinking about what we wanted from the get-go. It was more of a let's react to what we receive and make it from there.
Even so, it's going to be hard to drink our last bottle of that one.
Yeah, I just had one recently, and it was it's very different and unique, and I really enjoy it. It's a crowd favorite.
Well, that's my California address. You're sitting in there, Travis. So
he's taking care of it. Boy, I'll tell you, we've been able to do a lot of cleaning and organizing and a lot of lawn work and landscaping work with the place being shut down. So the place is looking amazing. So we can't wait to have guests as soon as possible.
But it's still all here. It's there waiting whenever you guys come back.
We've reorganized a little bit we're experimenting with some different layouts in the living room to make it a little more comfortable for people to sit and relax. So more seating there. Anybody else have the wine or have had it recently that would like to comment or ask any questions? So whoop, maybe somebody wanted to, but ended up hanging up. That was Ed. So again, we're just so everybody knows, we do have our SIP special. So we have a area of our website as you're checking out where you can put in a coupon code. And if you put in capital SIP, SIP, as long as you have selected 6 bottles or more, and you will receive then a 20% discount on whatever is in your cart. And it will ship for free anywhere in the continental US. And we are still, through the month of May, donating half of our proceeds from the wine sales to 3 local charities that are helping families and children who are directly impacted by the pandemic. We have Corazon Healdsburg. We have the Boys and Girls Club of Healdsburg, Sonoma Marin. And we have Sonoma Family Meal, which is a outfit that helps deliver food to the needy. All great organizations, all very local in terms of their leadership, and groups that we feel very strongly about and want to give back to the local community. And those are the groups that we're partnering with to hopefully raise some money for a good cause. So everyone gets good wine, and we get some money to people who have a need. So that's all the way through the end of May. So next week we're skipping. We don't have a SIP next week, but the following week after that we're going to be doing our Syrah. So you have time to order and get delivered some Syrah, and then the week after that is going to be the Viognier. I can tell you that the 2018 Viognier, we're down to the last maybe 10 cases. And if you haven't had a chance to taste that wine, or if you haven't had it recently, it is like peaking. It's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. So if you get a chance, put that on your orders, and we'll get that out to you as soon as possible, and you'll be able to enjoy that with us in the week after next, and Syrah will be in 2 weeks' time. So if you have any other questions, you can email me at david@zowines.com, and we hope everyone stays safe and healthy, and enjoys the rest of that bottle of Zin. Hopefully you've cracked open. Any last questions? Otherwise, we'll see you all next time. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.